Do you think the Jewish people believe you should be broke?
Are you saying that Jewish people appreciate money more than...
No, they believe in wealth.
Some people would find that offensive.
No, wait a minute now. I'm not talking about some people. I'm talking about the Bible. The blessing of Abraham. Abraham was extremely wealthy, and he had a covenant with God. It's not the Jewish blessing, it's the Abrahamic blessing.
Abraham had always been faithful to God and, in exchange, received many blessings from him. But his greatest gift had yet to come. Abraham and his wife Sarah were old and had no offspring. Therefore, Abraham did not have an heir. Using a vision, God told Abraham that he would finally have the son he so much wanted. It was nighttime, and God asked him to look up at the sky, trying to count the endless bright stars. And, like the stars, he said that Abraham's offspring would be numerous and inherit God's given land. But their descendants would be pilgrims, being subjected to slavery in lands ruled by others. They would remain captives for 400 years, but, in the end, they would find great sources of wealth and inherit the promised land. Abraham believed in the Lord's promise, but his wife Sarah was already too old to have children. His wife believed that God's will did not regard her as someone capable of giving an heir to Abraham. She then presented her beautiful young Egyptian slave to him, so that Abraham could have his son with her. He united himself with Hagar, and she gave him his first child, named Ishmael. The boy's fate was to be the patriarch of a great nation, and his descendants would spread throughout the land. Ishmael would give origin to the Arab people, who would later evolve around the Islamic culture. But Ishmael was not the son who would inherit the Promised Land, since Abraham would be the father of many nations. God again blessed Abraham. Due to this blessing, his wife Sarah, albeit old, became pregnant and gave Abraham another child. Sarah's would be called Isaac, and his descendants would create a great nation. Abraham, the great patriarch, was already quite ancient when he died of old age. Everything he had was passed to his son Isaac. He married Rebekah, with the intent to continue the lineage that God had promised to Abraham. But Rebekah was sterile, and the couple had no children. Isaac prayed to God, and he established his pact with Abraham's son. God affirmed Rebekah would give birth to twins, and each would be the patriarch of a different nation. But the rivalry between the twins would start in their mother's womb. By God's grace, Rebekah gave birth to 2 boys. The firstborn was called Esau, and attached to his older brother's heel, Jacob was born. The brothers, although they had shared the same womb, couldn't be more different in personality and appearance. Esau was red-haired and hairy, and became a hunter, while Jacob became a shepherd. Isaac had a preference for Esau, who not only was his firstborn, but also brought meat that his father deeply appreciated. In turn, Rebekah had in Jacob her favorite. After an unsuccessful hunt, Esau went home hungry and found Jacob making a stew. He asked his brother for some of his food, but Jacob replied that he would only do it if Esau gave up his condition as Isaac's heir. Esau, whose judgment was clouded by hunger, gave up his right. His inheritance would be worthless if he died of starvation. Time passed, and when Isaac was old, feeling that death was impending, he asked Esau to go out to bring him some of the meat he liked. He would give him his blessings after it, to have a peaceful eternal rest. Rebekah, after hearing what Isaac had said, ran to her son Jacob, and together they plotted a way to receive this blessing in his brother's place, and to do so, he would have to impersonate Esau. They waited for Esau to leave to put their plan in motion. Isaac was almost blind, so Rebekah believed she could fool him. But Jacob had a smooth body, while Esau was quite hairy. Obeying his mother, Jacob slaughtered 2 of his lambs, and his mother prepared a tasty meal. She dressed her favorite son in his brother's clothes and glued the lamb wool to Jacob's body to imitate Esau's hair, and walked to Isaac's tent. Jacob served the food to his old father, and walked to him to receive his final blessings. Isaac was unsettled by his son's voice tone, which sounded different. So he decided to touch him, but when he felt the hairy body of his son, his suspicion fell apart. With that, Jacob received his father's blessing, which had been intended to his brother, and walked away. Esau appeared right after his hunt, but it was too late. His brother had received his blessing. Esau wanted revenge, and Jacob was asked by his mother to flee and returned only when his brother's fury was appeased. During his exile, he had several children and prospered. A long period after that, God commanded him to return to his father's land, but he feared Esau's reception. When they met again, the brothers embraced each other and were reconciled. Jacob would continue the lineage of God's chosen people. It would be known as Israel, and the people as Israelites.
We know that there's a person, his name is Esau, right? And he had a brother, Yaakov, and of course, he is the son of Yitzchak, Yaakov and Esau, and so on. We also know that, as I mentioned before, that Esau is a patriarch. He's an Ov, just like Yaakov Avinu, and so on, you know. And his job, and I talked about this in a previous year, his job, in many ways, is patriarchal, which means that he really is part of the tikkun process. Now, I'm not going to go into that, obviously, that whole shir. That shir, I think I went really extensively. I think the name of the shir was the Transformation of Reality in the Messianic Era, which I gave a couple of weeks ago. But in any case, that's who he is, and so on. Now, he obviously rebelled. He left Judaism, whatever. And his father told him, you know, after Yaakov got the blessings, so then he came in and said, you know, what do you mean, isn't there a blessing for me? And I mentioned that he gave a blessing to Esau. What was the blessing? That he should still be, that if Yaakov and his descendants sin, then Esau will be the one to bring a kapora, an atonement, to the descendants of Yaakov, and he will be the one to persecute them, you know, or to make them suffer in order to have a kapora, which is an atonement. So he therefore is still part of the tikkun process, although he's in part of the punishment phase, as opposed to the tikkun phase, or the phase where you do the mitzvahs and so on. In any case, so Esau, what does he do? So Esau leads, you know, he leaves Yaakov Avinu and so on, and they meet and so on. Now, who is Esau today? So Esau became Edom. Okay, the Torah says Esau zu Edom, specific pasuk, Vayishlach, that the Edomites, which is a nation, they are the descendants of Esau, and they reside in the area of Har Seir, which is basically, if I remember correctly, it's around Eilat. It's the southern part of Israel. It's the Negev and so on, you know. And then it says that Edom became Rome. Now, I do want to mention that in between, before Rome was established in Italy, there was a nation called the Etruscans. Most people probably never heard of the Etruscans, but they were the forerunners before Rome, you see. Now, nobody knows much about the Etruscans, but historians believe that the Etruscans were a nation that came from the Middle East, you see. And we know Esau, obviously the origin of Esau, is the Middle East, Har Seir. So I believe the Etruscans derive from Esau, and they went from the Middle East, which is Israel at that time, Canaan or Canaan, whatever, and they moved on to Europe, which is Italy. So therefore I believe Edomites became the Etruscans. And the Etruscans is what became Rome. In 525 BCE, the Etruscans became, or that's when the Roman Republic was founded. Before that, for the previous couple of hundred years, it was the Etruscan civilization. So Esau becomes Edom. Edom, like I said, becomes the Etruscans become Rome, which of course took over the entire world, and so on, you know. Now, what is interesting is Rome did not remain Esav. That's an interesting idea. You see, once Yitzchak gave over the ability or the task of Esav to punish Yaakov and his descendants in order to achieve a kapara, an atonement, right? So there was a big problem, because it would take at least another 2,000 years. You know, Rome was, let's say, was founded as a nation, republic 525 BCE, you see. But that would mean that in order for Esav, in the form of Rome, to do his job, right, he would have to be a ruler of the world, right, for 2,500 years, because that's really what we're looking at now. 2,500 years after Rome became a republic, you see. But clearly the Rebbe Shem did not want that. He doesn't want Rome to be, you know, the head of the nations in that sense for so long, because that's what it would have to be in order for Rome to be able to persecute, right, the Jewish people. So what he did, what the Rebbe Shem did, is Rome therefore became a religion. You see, Rome turned instead from a nation which can persecute the Jews. They destroyed the Beis Hamikdash and so on. And Rome therefore changed into a religion, you see. And that religion, of course, we know as Christianity. That's what they became. And as such, they could persecute the Jews, Christianity that is, for thousands of years, because a religion doesn't necessarily remain as a nation. There are many nations that can become Christians, you see, which is really exactly what happened. So Rome became Christianity, and as such, the whole Europe became Christian. So wherever the Jews would go in Europe, that would be called, in the territories, right, of Esav. And therefore, no matter where they would go in Europe, they could be, therefore, persecuted by Esav. That's a very important concept. Now, Christianity itself obviously became part of what's called Western civilization, you see. And what I once mentioned quite a while ago is that Western civilization can be subdivided in three parts. Why? First of all, what are the three parts? So the Soviet Union or Russia is one, Europe is two, and the United States is the third part, three. Because Esav had three characteristics, which I once mentioned. The first characteristic is that Esav is a tremendous min. A min is a Apikoros heretic. That's who he is. And of course we know that Russia is heretical. You know, even though there's a thing called the Russian Orthodox Church and so on. But Russia under the communist regime were complete atheists. In fact, they hated religion and so on. So that part of Esav, Russia, communism I should say, is the worst part of Esav. The second part of Esav is based on another characteristic of Esav, which is he's a fraud. He's an imposter. He acts as if he's religious or whatever. Meanwhile, he commits acts, right, which are terrible, evil, and cruel. You see, all professing to be tzaddikim. That's Europe. Europe is Christian. But do you know how many wars Europe were in? It's astounding that a religion like Christianity, which they say they preach peace and all that, is guilty of so many wars in Europe. Yeah, there were wars that lasted 100 years war. Could you imagine a war lasting 100 years? Like, what is that supposed to mean? How could you fight over something lasting 100 years? You see. So therefore Europe obviously engaged in a war, and they were really in many ways terrible. People used to fear Spain because Spain was vicious in trying to convert people to Christianity. I mean, Inquisition is obviously one of them, where they would kill you if you didn't become a Christian. And this happened in many places and so on. In any case, so therefore, that's the concept of Europe. And what that means is that Europe was Christian, and it's the characteristic of Esav as a fraud, as an imposter, because they would declare themselves as tzaddikim, righteous people, right? And as a result of that, this is what they would appear as. Meanwhile, they would commit terrible acts of savagery and butchery. Who knows how many people got killed in Europe, right? Based on what? Based on the Inquisition, the Crusades, and so on, or the expulsions. There's so many things that happened as a result of Christianity in Europe. Now, I'm not saying everybody was this, or all Christians were this. I'm not saying that. But there's no question that in many ways it was certainly aided and abetted by many, many evil people. There were many popes that were part of this, plan to kill the Jews or to make them suffer. I don't want to go in obviously all the ways that they did that, you see, but that basically is the second part of Esav, where Esav is a fraud. He's an imposter, you see, and that's Europe. Then the third part of Esav is I hate to use the word fun-loving, but Esav is an individual that loves pleasure, materialism, and that obviously is represented by the United States. So Western civilization is really those three parts. It's Russia, it's Europe, and it's America. And that is Esav today, you see. So that is very important to get a handle on what Esav is, it's interesting when you think about it, Communism, which was the worst part of Esav, you see. In fact, it's so bad that the Russian only allowed it to exist basically from 1917, right, till 1991 or 90 or whatever, when you had perestroika with Gorbachev and so on. But it's interesting that the Soviet Union collapsed, or Gorbachev ended it when, what was the date? And I'll never forget, I was shocked, because I basically, I know about this. When did he call the end of the Soviet Union? On December 25th. I think it's 1990 or 91, I don't recall which date, more than 30 years ago and so on, But wait a minute, December 25th is what? December 25th is Christmas, right? Basically, that's their origin. That's the birth of their person that they worship and so on, Why? Because communism is really the worst part of Esav. And Esav is fundamentally Christianity, you see. So if it's going to begin to collapse, it did. It collapsed on, I think it was Thursday, December 25th. And I find that to be really, in many ways, incredible and so on, you see. In any case, and we also see, the United States is Esav, and the seat of Christianity, we know, of course, is the Vatican. That is the seat, and the Vatican, obviously, is in Italy. That's where it is. So Italy really took over the entire inheritance, so to speak, of Esav. You see, Italy, the Vatican, is the seat of Christianity. And it took over the entire, culture, basically, of Esav himself. In fact, what's interesting is that the word Vatican, right, if you spell it in Hebrew and you jumble the letters, Vatican in Hebrew is the same letters as Tikkun, which tells us that Esav had a specific task in the Tikkun process. And we know that what the task is. That task is to do what? Is to bring a kapora to the Jews by having them suffer. In fact, one of the interesting ideas also is that if you look at Italy, it's shaped like a boot. It's famous, shaped like a boot. And the way Esav is described in the Torah is a boot. the cave Esav and the heel, and Yaakov held on to the heel of Esav. So the Torah's description, you see, of Esav is really, besides having red hair, it's a boot, you see, and Italy is shaped like a boot, which is very interesting. And there's always something which, when you think about, makes a lot of sense. What doesn't make sense is why Christianity is in Italy. Because if you think about it, Yeshu was Jewish. So therefore, his place of residence, in fact, that's where he lived, should be in Israel or Judea. So why did Christianity make their seat in the Vatican, which is located in Italy? And the answer to that is because Rome, or the Italians, right, is really the inheritors of Christianity, you see. And therefore Christianity, which takes its cue from Rome, Rome of course is Italy, therefore Christianity, which inherited, right, the concepts of Rome, they therefore are in Italy. Makes sense. Not in Israel or Judea, and so on. In any case, this is what we see, you see. So as I mentioned, Rome became a religion. So therefore the Jews, no matter where they would be exiled, would always be called, they would be located in Europe, which is Western civilization, and they would be subject to persecution. So therefore, Esav now becomes a religion which now can follow the Jews wherever they go. Any case, that's what happened there. In fact, what is interesting is in Ari, the great Kabbalist, the Ari, says that Yeshu was a Gilgal of Esav, which is interesting, and so on. So Esav clearly is part of the whole tikkun process, you see. So that is what Esav is. Okay. Now we know something radical happened. What is that? And that is that, which I mentioned in that shir, the previous year, and so on, you know. And that is that Esav became two dimensions, two forms, you see. The first form is the one that persecutes the Jews. And that is what's called Rasha Esav. That is the evil part of Esav, you see. So that's one dimension or one form. And the second part is where we read, and I mentioned this, the whole story, where Esav wanted to do tshuva, and he almost did. Had Yaakov recognized that, then had he given Dinah as a wife to Esav, then Esav would have been restored, basically, as a patriarch and so on. I had mentioned this in a previous year. So therefore that becomes a second part of Esav, or a different form of Esav. You know, which is interesting, that Esav actually split in two different forms. The first form is called the Rasha Esav, the evil of Esav. And the second form is the Tov Esav, the good part of Esav, that inherently wants to return and fulfill the passage where it says, the Rav Yavotzoir, and the older will serve the younger, you see. So that's a prophecy which must happen. And that means that Esav is destined to do tshuva at the end of time.
The mystery of Ishmael.
Yes. Now this is prophetic. This has affected every one of our lives. I mean, to this day, you're talking about news reports, is all linked to a mystery that goes back to the tents of Abraham. And it's amazing, the whole world, the piece of the world hangs on a mystery that happened in this desert dweller tent with these two sons. And it's behind everything from Islam to Muhammad to Osama bin Laden to Yasser Arafat to the threats on America, all the way back to Abraham's tent. I mean, really every answer is in the Bible. I mean, Bible explains everything. And so we go back to Abraham. Genesis. God gives him the promise, I will give you a son. A great nation will come from you. But as we know, he comes up with an idea. Well, God's not doing it, so you know what? We got to help God out, and that's always a danger sign. We're going to help God out, and you go into the handmaid Hagar, and you'll have a baby through her because I can't have a baby. So he does, and what happens comes out Ishmael. Here's Abraham's firstborn son, Ishmael. Now Ishmael, is there. Now keep in mind, he is there for years before there's anybody else. He is viewed as the heir to Abraham. I mean, when God speaks to Abraham and says, I'm going to do a great thing, what Abraham says is, yes, Ishmael will be the one. So everybody thought it was Ishmael. Everybody thought Ishmael was the one of the promise, including Abraham, Hagar had to have, Sarah had to have. So they thought this was the way. So he's growing up as the one. Now, at one point, God gives a prophecy concerning Ishmael. Now, God promises God will make Ishmael a great nation as well. He'll give him much. But he also says he'll be wild. He also says his sword will be against everybody. His hand will be against everybody. So it's going to be a wild kind of thing going on there with Ishmael. But he's going to be blessed. But the thing is, keep in mind, now here's what happens. Then, all of a sudden, God comes back and says, now, no, you, Sarah, old Sarah, you are going to have a baby. And Sarah laughs, and God says, Sarah, why'd you laugh? And Sarah says, I didn't laugh. He says, no, you did. And the name of the baby is going to be called Laughter, because they laughed. So in Hebrew, that's Yitzhak, which is Isaac. So you have Ishmael, and you have Isaac. Now, what happens with this thing? What happens is, because of the conflict between the two sons, it comes to a point where Sarah says, and then God says, no, Abraham, it's okay, it's my will. You're going to have to send away Hagar and Ishmael. Okay, so Hagar and Ishmael go away to the desert. God takes care of them and gives a promise again. He confirms, I'm going to make a great nation. But think of something. We don't usually think about this. Imagine you're Ishmael. Okay, you're Ishmael, and you're growing up as the beloved son of your father, and then all of a sudden comes another child. Now, sibling rivalry is a problem to begin with, but here's another child. Now he's the one. So first of all, what you're going to be feeling, probably jealousy, probably resentful. Then you lose everything. When you're about 13, you lose everything. You lose the birthright. You lose what looks like your inheritance. You lose your father. You lose all that honored position. You lose all that. What is that going to, and he's just becoming a teenager now. What is that going to do to him? What's that going to do to his being? And from him come much of the Arab peoples, as we know. Now, let me just say something, the mystery, who is it today? Now, there's some who say, no, there's no question, from Ishmael came the Ishmaelites. From the Ishmaelites, there's no question that the blood of the Ishmaelites is throughout the Arab world, whether there's also other blood as well. But we have ancient records from the Babylonians, even from the Assyrians, that link up the Ishmaelites with the Arab peoples. We even have records of Arab peoples before Muhammad, before Islam came, where they said, we are the children of Ishmael. Before, Ishmael, when Muhammad came, he said, I'm from Ishmael, we're from Ishmael. So now, no matter what, they've taken up the mantle of Ishmael. But the point is that, number one, by the way, the Arab civilization had some great, wonderful things, and I love Arab people, and I love when they get saved. One of my greatest blessings as a Jewish believer is to find an Arab believer who loves the Lord. It's the most wonderful thing in the world. Amen. But there's a mystery going on throughout history. You have the people here, clearly the blood of Ishmael is there among the Arabic world, and the mantle of Ishmael they've taken up. If you read the Quran, it focuses a lot on Ishmael. It says Ishmael is the one. It says Ishmael, not Isaac. It says Abraham offered up Ishmael. It says Ishmael and Hagar, they came to Mecca, and then Ishmael died in Mecca. The whole thing. So you've got this whole Ishmael thing going on, the spirit of Ishmael, all that. Now, but to understand this, what does this reveal? Number one, about what's happening. Number one, God says, I will make a great nation. So God said that way back 4,000 years ago. He's done it. The Arab peoples are one of the most populous peoples in the world, number one. But number two, also, it's telling you from Genesis, from the tents of Abraham, that the destiny of the Arab people is linked to the Jewish people. They're all there together. That's why there's a link between, Arabs and Jews are cousins. You wouldn't know it because the enemy so destroyed this thing, so used it. But in the end, they're going to be back together.
I don't know that I was ever more inspired than to be on the South Lawn on a sunny day, to see the President of the United States, the Prime Minister of Israel, sit down with leaders of Arab nations and sign the Abraham Accords. History-making progress.
That was an experience that I lived during that sunny day. It was a bright day, and to be frank, I believed I said, it's a message that this bright day is for a bright future.
We're here this afternoon to change the course of history. After decades of division and conflict, we mark the dawn of a new Middle East.